quotes, plot, analysis. Usually I have time to review these before we start, but I didn't have time today.
Who's the slacker now?
I am the Slacker, and welcome back to the Slacker, I mean CodeX Cantina. I am Una.
And I'm Crypto.
Ooh, you said that like Batman.
I'm giving the energy tonight.
It's the secret identity. Today, we are doing the Harrison Bergeron story, probably Kurt Vonnegut's most popular short story. It's a science fiction piece that came out in October of 1961. Later came out in Welcome to the Monkey House, and I'll put a link to it down below where you can read it if you haven't already. And also, we've got a little treat where it looks like some people have done some video versions of it online that you can check out for free too. So with that said, Crypto, what are your initial thoughts on this short piece?
Oh, I love it. I think it's fantastic. It is, I don't want to say the best example of a short story, but you could make a good argument that the character development in this is so amazing, and the story, it just feels so flushed out for like, I don't even know how many pages. I mean, it was in a magazine, right? So it's just pages long, but it feels so, it has so much depth. Oh, I love this story.
I think this is an important subject even today to talk about, like equality, egalitarianism. It's something that is just being talked at from a lot of different angles today, from like the Me Too movement, from Black Lives Matter. There's just a lot of ways to come at what does it mean to be equal. And I think that when you look at this, so this story is what, third person limited from George's perspective, right? And I feel like you get a pretty neutral view of this world through his eyes. And I think what the book version paints is a really interesting way to talk about what does equality mean, as opposed to, I felt like there's like a few subtle differences when you showed me that movie version. Now that movie version, like the video, you said you were really familiar with that, like that you've been teaching this class or something like that?
So in civics, when I taught civics many years ago, we have to teach the amendments, and so when we'd get to the end of them, as kind of a treat for learning all the amendments to the Constitution, I would show the short movie 2081, 2081. The movie is named after the year that the short story is taking place, and so I show this to the students, and we kind of have a little discussion about equality, because that's what many of the amendments are for, are trying to make the country as equal as possible, and we have a good discussion about that.
Good. Well, let's have another good one today. I'm going to go straight into quotes, which is basically, we're still in spoiler-free zone, but my only quote that I took was actually kind of like the opening line from this book. Well, I keep saying book. Short story,
Novella.
The year was 2081, and everybody was finally equal. They weren't only equal before God and the law. They were equal every which way. Nobody was smarter than anybody else. Nobody was better looking than anybody else. Nobody was stronger or quicker than anybody else.
Yeah, it's a great opening line, and probably the most powerful part of the whole short story.
I mean, it obviously sets the tone. And he gets Vonnegut-y. I know you said you're not. So if you didn't know, for those out there watching right now, Kurt Vonnegut is like one of my favorite authors of all time. And it gets very Vonnegut-y when you're reading it. I don't know. This is an interesting tone where it sets kind of like a serious mode, and then he'll bring in kind of some of the satirical, funny comedy lines that happen, which basically directly play off this concept that everyone was finally equal, and not just in law and God's eyes, but in every which way.
Yeah, he definitely paints this dystopia of the future, but then I think he almost goes, I mean, I agree, it is satirical, but it's almost goofy, especially when you watch the movie and kind of reflect on it as another medium. So I mean, as a short story, it's definitely maybe more satirical, but when you watch that little short movie, it's 25 minutes, it almost feels goofy and silly and just like, this is where we could be
Yeah.
headed, and it's scary.
Well, and think about it. He wrote this in, what was it, 1961.
No, he wrote it before then, though, right? Didn't he?
Well, it was
Published.
published in
Yeah,
1961, October of 1961.
he wrote it like I think many years before that. I think
Okay.
I'm pretty sure he wrote it a long time before that. Uh,
But that was before we had a lot of the things that we have now. But look at him. I mean, there's commentary here about TV culture, beyond just equality. There's commentary in here about the arts and such. You could take this short story a lot of different ways.
oh, definitely, definitely. I think this is probably one of the most relevant of a science fiction story that is predicting the future that we could possibly be headed towards, which is very scary. And people don't even realize it, like in the story, and I don't want to get into spoilers yet, but as a teacher, and I start asking students, and again, they're not expected to know all of it yet because they're students and I'm there to teach them those things, but to even talk to some adults and some students that should know something and they have no clue of their own rights that are being taken away, this doesn't seem, unplausible to actually happen, which is really, really scary.
Now, did you have a quote as well?
As soon as you said this, because I'd always known it from the name 2081, and as soon as it started, I was like, oh, this is the movie. I was like, oh, so it has a different title for the short story. I listened to it from the guy that reads it on YouTube, and then that was it.
I will jump into the plot now. So now we're entering the spoiler zone, but I mean it's 4 or 6 pages. Just go read
Yeah,
the story real quick. The link's
You
down
can
below.
read it in 10 minutes, easy.
In the year 2081, everyone is handicapped to be equal. People are forced into mental and physical handicaps that keep them from being too pretty, too athletic, or too smart. A man and his wife had their child taken away at a young age. Years later, the husband and wife are watching TV. Their son breaks out of jail, lists his handicaps, emerges on the TV, declares himself the emperor, and is shot by the handicap general. The man misses the action as he was out getting a beer. The woman is seemingly unable to recall what she just witnessed, and they go on with their very average lives. So, very quick story, as short as any other story would be, right? If Vonnegut were writing this review.
Yeah,
But
that's funny.
But I found a quote for why Vonnegut started to write this story that I'm not sure if you're aware of, but he said that in high school he wasn't in the in crowd, and that he found himself having some feelings of envy or self-pity, and I think that's where he drew a lot of his influence in this story. And you'll notice how old is Harrison in this story when he breaks out of jail and declares himself emperor or whatever. He's 14 years old, right at the same age probably as a young high school student, right?
Oh, yeah, freshman. Yep, 14, 15.
So I think this is the concept of beyond just equality. I think what maybe started Vonnegut on this track is that what if we didn't have envy? Like what if we actually were equal? Would that get rid of envy? And so he's painted this picture of America in the future, much more in the future back then than it is now. But we've now had the 211th, 12th, and 13th amendments. That's a lot of amendments from where are we right now, 27,
Yep.
right?
That's hundreds added within 120 years of when he wrote this, and we'd only did 27 in 140-ish years when he wrote it. So that's crazy that you would add 180, 90 something of them. That's like one per year.
Yeah, the handicap general went a little nuts with influencing probably what laws needed to be passed. But I guess the first question that I need to ask here is that in this America, everyone is equal, allegedly, right?
But they're not, but we'll get to that.
Right. But did that get rid of envy?
No.
Right.
Because Harrison's dad, George, he is envious that his wife doesn't have to have the noise machine and she's envious that she doesn't have a noise machine.
I wish I had
Yeah.
chimes. I would play them. I'd play them on Sunday, like church.
I'd play them really loud. Yeah, so no, like they're still it is the epitome of even something that is so horrible that destroys your intelligence. Someone is still envious that you would have to have a machine to destroy your intelligence to bring you down to a lower level. Like, so the grass, it's the epitome of the grass is always greener on the other side. So, and I think that was one of the major points he was trying to get across, that even if we were all equal in that regard, people would still find a way to be envious of others in some capacity.
I like it because if you think about it, the way the law was written was meant to be equal opportunity, right? Egalitarianism, where no matter your race, no matter your gender, no matter your background, you should be able to have the same opportunities as everyone else has. But that doesn't always produce the same results, right? When people talk about equality, sometimes they move it to an outcome-based equalization. So some people are naturally going to be taller. You know, they're going to be the basketball players. Some people are naturally going to be faster. They're going to be the track artists or the people that are playing sports that require speed. Even though the founding fathers said we were going to be created equal, we're not really equal. We may start all at the starting line, but we don't always get to the finish line at the same time. So here is a world where they specifically are doing outcome-based equality, where it doesn't matter how fast you are or how beautiful you are. You get handicapped so that everyone becomes the lowest common denominator, which I think is really, really interesting because I've had a lot of talks about that with my sister because there's some of that going on, like even in the publishing world right now in terms of minorities getting deals. They weren't getting enough deals. They weren't getting as many deals as maybe some of the white people were in America. So they started making sure that the minorities started getting more deals, which started to approach some of that outcome-based measuring. And I think it's really interesting the way that Vonnegut has taken something that is just so logical and thinky and just made it funny and cartoony, to your point that you were saying earlier.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, he gets a little goofy. Like, this is how ridiculous things would have to be to have the big, strong people walking around with, weight suits, and the smart people having to have some type of device that would hinder their intelligence. And it just, especially in the movie version, you can see how ridiculous that would be to implement into real life, to see all the big athletes carrying around all these weights and stuff. And then ultimately it wouldn't be effective because, as one of the other, like, there's three major points. We've already talked about one. The second one is that we always evolve and we're always trying to better ourselves, and Harrison does just that. And it doesn't matter that, again, major spoilers to the end of the very short story. You probably could have
No, we're in spoiler free zone. You're good.
At the end, Harrison is able to rip off his intelligence device because he's a super genius. He's able to rip off, like tissue paper, his 700 pounds of weights, and he can also now float, fly, levitate, sort of. So like he's evolved to have like even superpowers while being restricted the whole time of having all these weights and all this detriment stuff to him. He's still been able to evolve, and that's one of the things, is that we're always trying to better ourselves, even when people are trying to keep us down.
Well, even to that point, I think that raises the question: do people even want equality? When you look at like the ballerinas, and the wife's like, "Oh, that was nice," and he's just like, "As good as anyone else." Like, it takes away the beauty in art in a sense. When they're sitting there talking on the couch, and the dad's uncomfortable. She's like, "Well, why don't you just take off a few beads? Just a few. I don't care if you're not equal. Just take a few off and you'll be fine." So we have a couple of scenarios that is painting the picture that people don't totally want equality either, I feel like, with some of those lines.
Yeah. And to your point too, you were talking about like modern times with this as well, of us being seen as equal. I mean, there's many famous affirmative action cases for many different races, and especially like back in the 70s, there were cases where some white people were not being allowed in because they were white, because they had to hold so many spots back for other minorities, and they were suing because they're like, that's not fair. Like, you're not letting me in because of my race, and you are letting them in because of their race. So it's like this double standard, and so that's another thing that I think he's kind of bringing up, and it's like this guy could see the future. It is really, really scary. And I know I said that several times already, but his portrayal of what could happen is getting to a point that's almost spot on.
It's insane. I mean, he wrote one of his first novel was Play Your Piano, and I think I've told you about that I want us to read that at some point. He wrote that back in the 60s, and it was talking about artificial intelligence and what that would do. It's insane, the foresight that he really had. I want to go back to what you were saying earlier, which is a hot topic, I think, for a lot of people. There's a quote that Kurt Vonnegut said. He said this at Wheaton College, and it's actually a quote from Communism, I think, Karl Marx, I think it was.
Marx?
Karl Marx, sorry. From each according to his abilities, to each according his needs. And Kurt Vonnegut said that in one of his speeches at Wheaton College. And I think I've told you before, he has some socialist undertones to some of his writing. I think you see some interesting things here too, where what does Harrison do once he is no longer equal? He says, I'm the emperor, right? He claims a bride. And then what does he do? He starts saying, I will reward you for your abilities. And, he takes the musicians and he says, okay, you need to start playing better. For those that play better, I will make you a duke or an earl in my new regime. That I think this is another one of those social commentaries from him, where you have to look at kind of like what the conversation is between Hazel and George about equality, and they don't care about that. And then you come and look at their son, Harrison, who says, I'm going to be the emperor. He doesn't promise to free others of these handicaps. He just promises to reward certain people that pay favor to him, essentially.
Yeah, and that's
what are your thoughts on that?
That's almost like a legalism idea, which is a very ancient Chinese philosophy of punishing whole masses of people, but also rewarding too. And so it's kind of an ideology of how to govern people almost, which is a very authoritarian idea of an emperor and him punishing massive people and rewarding massive people. I think that the point of the end there of him being broken away from the chains of society comes back to the third idea that I think that he was trying to get across in this story, is that it's not that we all want to be equal. And to bring it kind of home, to bring it back to your very beginning point, is, and I try to get my students to do this when I try to get them to this point, understand that the founding fathers wanted us to all have equal opportunity, but they all wanted us to be treated fair. And I think that's the main thing, is if everybody's treated fairly, equality doesn't matter as long as everybody's treated fair, because then you use your own talents to foster what you want. And some people are content with less and some people want more. And that's just kind of the way of life.
Do you sympathize with Harrison in the story?
For a short period, I think you're supposed to. But then I think that at the end, you're not supposed to. And then at the very, very end, when the handicapper general kills him and the empress, then you are again, because you see the evils of both sides. I mean, because he's trying to point out, I think, both sides of the story, that everybody's limited, because if you allow people with their greater gifts to take over, they will always be bad. That we're like innately, humans are innately, not good or something.
Well, that's a very common characteristic of Vonnegut, is that these people paint these utopias, and once they reach it, they find out it wasn't perfect, or it traps them or makes things worse. It's what you think you want, like as you're watching, between Hazel and George, and you think they want that freedom, you think they want to break free of it, then you see Harrison do it, right? And at first you're like, yeah, that's what I wanted. And then you start to realize emperor? Like, what's going on here? And you know, and the handicapped general shoots him. He achieves his dream, his goal, but then you realize it wasn't what he really wanted, and it paints the opposite picture. And I think it's interesting to kind of what you were pointing out earlier too. You don't want everything to be equal, but you don't want that rule by totalitarianism either. That he kind of goes on both sides and doesn't paint like a beautiful, easy, this is the answer. He just kind of mocks and makes fun of extremes, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
What about, did you notice that, I didn't have a strong theory about why this was, but did you notice what they were handicapped with in the short story?
In, what do you mean, what regard? All the different handicaps?
Like what weighed them down?
It was like the lead balls, right?
Birdshot,
yeah.
And then how did Harrison die?
Yeah, he birdshot shotgun.
So I feel like there's something there, but I wasn't really able to pull out what that could possibly mean or represent. But why specifically make it birdshot?
Just
that is weighing them down, and then they get killed by it when they are free.
Are doves mentioned? For some reason, I'm remembering doves being mentioned.
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to it. It's Thursday today. I listened to it on Monday, so I mean, they're
if there were doves, what would that represent?
Purity, freedom. Doves always come in pairs, so you have Harrison and his new empress, and then you have his parents. So there's pairs everywhere. Maybe we're reading too much into it, going a little too deep. I don't know. I mean, this is kind of
maybe. But I feel like we're obviously meant to have like antipathy for the handicapped general, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, even in the short story that you showed me online, I mean, she had her bun was real tight. She looked stern. Like, she didn't look like a lady that was fun to drink with, right?
And you'll notice, I think, that it's kind of implied in the story, and I think that's why they did it in the show as well, is that she is not handicapped. Like, she doesn't have to cover her face. She's able to tote around a gun and shoot it. Like, if you're a good shot, shouldn't you have to wear special glasses that make it so you can't be a good shot? Like, so if I'm a bad shot, you got to be equal to me, so you can't shoot a gun better than me. But she's able to shoot him easily, and she's smart enough to figure out what he's trying to do and immediately get there and get things done and killed. Like, so again, it goes back to that, she is a totalitarian ruler that doesn't want to share her power because she's
anti-privilege.
Yeah.
You could say that her character is anti-privilege. Like, that's what she represents.
Incarnate,
and what she does is she goes around and she kills privilege.
Yeah.
Right? So when people try to break free, like when they try to gain their freedom, physical freedom, beauty freedom, artistic expression freedom, anti-privilege would be the one to come in and murder that intention in a sense.
And it's all done under the guise of these 3 new amendments that are mentioned at the very beginning of the story.
That's what they finally achieved, right?
Yeah. And so also, one last thing. I think also it's interesting that it's 3 amendments, and the numbers don't correlate exactly. Maybe it would have been 2 spot on the nose if he would have written it that way. But the Civil War amendments that give massive freedom to people in our country were, 13, 14, 15, and it's 211, 212, 213 here. So if he'd used 213, 214, 215, maybe it would have been a little too spot on to, like, freedoms are almost being taken away with these amendments. I don't know.
Maybe only the nerds that do the what do you call it, the Civil War reenactment that you do. You would be the one to pick up on something. Yeah, like that.
We're diving deep, baby. We're getting deep into the books here in the CodeX Cantina.
So overall, what are you going to give the story?
10 out of 10. Yeah.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, this is arguably the best short story ever in this category. Easy. As I said at the top, again, I'll kind of conclude here to reiterate my thesis point at the very beginning. This story paints a horrible, beautiful dystopia in such a short amount of time with rich, developed characters in a short amount of time, and you can feel for them and you can empathize and get angry and happy and sad all in like 5 or 6 pages, like a 10-minute read. All of that can happen. How can you not say that's a perfect story if you've gone through that roller coaster of emotions? So I don't know. Argue with me down in the comments below that this is not a perfect short story.
I'm going to go with a 9 out of 10.
Okay. Why would you say it's not perfect?
Okay.
What's wrong with it?
I'm going to say, okay. From a literature perspective, literature as in the underlying themes, I don't disagree. And I think that's why, I think I've told you, I mean, this is one of my favorite writers. I love Kurt Vonnegut.
Okay.
But I've read a lot of Kurt Vonnegut. Okay. And Kurt Vonnegut has this, his characters sometimes aren't directly characters so much as themes or means to an end to elicit a point. I agree, you feel for these characters, but at the same time, you still had a cartoony feeling, and deep inside, you had a cartoon feeling inside you, didn't you?
Yeah, it is a little bit goofy. Yeah, sure.
So there's no problem with that. If you want to give it a 10, that's totally cool. For me, that brought me down just a little bit when I know that I have a high suspension of disbelief, particularly when I'm reading Vonnegut. I'm still just never totally there when I'm getting Vonnegut by these cartoony characters in a sense.
Okay, so they're a little bit too zany for you, or almost like the big, like when you go to the fair and you get the big caricature and your head's all distorted. That's what you kind of feel.
It feels wrong to dock him a point for that. I think there's more to it than just that.
Okay.
But when I read Slaughterhouse-Five or God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, those made me want to change how I live my life.
Wow, that's powerful.
Wait till you read it. One day you'll read it. You'll know. It made me think differently, and even made me influenced me to change how I make some decisions around certain subjects and how I feel about certain things. This story is very important. I think equality is something that, while it's already discussed, we don't have enough answers to, and I think it's good for people to talk about it. It's not going to make me change how I live my life, though, after reading this story, I think.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess, and I hope that, we're grown men, but as teaching this to 12 and 13-year-olds, maybe it would change how they would treat other people.
Sure.
And that they would treat people fairly, not necessarily everybody being, quote, equal. Because we're not all equal, and, some people can jump high and some people can run fast and some people are smarter, and that's just the way of the world. But we can all be treated fairly. So I guess I would hope that somebody might have their life influenced that way.
Well, tell you what, the people that do too much outcome-based leveling, I hope it influences them, because I do personally sometimes struggle with the decision to do outcome-based leveling in some situations.
Yeah, we're all guilty.
All right, guys, so if you appreciated this, we are going to be coming at you next week with Epicac, another science fiction story from Vonnegut. So please hit the subscribe button or consider it, because it does help us out to unlock some features that we'd like to do.
Smash that like button!
With that, CodeX... So with that, guys, we appreciate you hanging out and talking with us. Keep the chat going in the comments below. Happy readings.
Peace.